Welcome. My name is Anne McManus, and this is Government Unlocked. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a U-turn here. We're going to go back in time, and specifically, we're going to be talking about the Revolutionary War and things that happened before the Revolutionary War here on Cape Cod. And I feel very fortunate today to have Dr. David Martin with me to talk to us about Cape Cod and its role in the Revolutionary period. I do want us to start the conversation, though, in talking about your book just a bit. This book has just recently come out, I think, in preparation for the 250th anniversary of our country, and it's a great book, so I can recommend it highly. But Dr. Martin is here to share with us some more information about the book and about Cape Cod and its role in the war. So thank you for being with me today, Dr. Martin.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. I have to admit, I found the book a real eye-opener. And I guess one question I have for you, and I'm trying to wrap my arms around it, what was Cape Cod like pre-Revolutionary War?
I think we can probably safely make some good guesses on that, looking back through the shades of time. Obviously, it was very much oriented toward the sea, and so we had, of course, many people who were farmers and the fishermen. We also had people who were merchants and were dealing in shipbuilding as well as international trade, and so it was a mixed community during that time that led up to the Revolution.
When you say international trade, did that mean that things would come on to the Cape and then be shipped off to other parts of the country?
Yes, the main trade, of course, was between the colonies and the mother country of England, and so it was international in that sense. But there were definitely people on both Nantucket and on Cape Cod who had very ongoing relationships from a trade point of view back and forth with England. So Cape Cod being a orient to the sea would be a very natural place for trade to originate, as well as shipbuilding as well.
So how would you describe it as far as its socioeconomics? Was it a rich area? Was it middle class? Did it have something for everyone?
Well, John Adams, in his wonderful correspondence with Thomas Jefferson after both men had patched up their differences, makes a wonderful statement in about 1815 or 16, and he talks about, well, when did the revolution actually begin? And he says that the revolution was well before any blood was shed at Lexington and Concord. It was a change in the minds of the people, and it was something that was what he called a product of the middling classes, farmers, fishermen, and so on. Of course, he says that the war was a consequence of the revolution, but the revolution was before the war. That's John Adams' point of view, and I think when he uses that phrase, middling classes, he is, of course, referring to the root movement that was going on the Cape and Islands and elsewhere.
So what did the Cape look like? Was it a bunch of small towns, or was it like it is today? We've got Hyannis as our hub. And
it was a group of small towns, and of course there were definite connections between them. It was a very close relationship, for example, between Barnstable and Yarmouth, but there wouldn't be anything that you would classify in today's terms as an urban area per se. And many of these had sprung up independently, or they multiplied after some of the original towns became established. The Cape Cod today, the map of Cape Cod includes some names of towns that were not on the map in 1775. Brewster is an example that broke off from Harwich. So we have to be a little careful about when we talk about the geography and go back to maps of the late 18th century.
So what was going on at the time that began to ferment this unrest on the Cape?
Well, certain historians point to particular events. In our book, we talk about the fact that In a sense, 1761 was the beginning of, you might say, the igniting of the revolutionary attitude. And why 1761? Well, that was because Britain enacted a law that was called the Writs of Assistance, which were basically search warrants. And Cape Cod's own James Otis Jr. made a fiery speech in 1761 in Boston that John Adams again regarded as something that lit the fire. And he was very active from 1760 to 1770 in rousing the spirit. Other historians say, well, yes, that was perhaps an immediate beginning that then was furthered at the end of the French and Indian Wars in 1763, and then Britain had to pay off a debt that they had run up by winning that war, and the colonies, of course, were viewed as a source of revenue. And then, of course, we have the chain of parliamentary acts that ultimately led up to the revolution. But other people say, well, no, it wasn't just that. And some historians will say, you could go back to the Mayflower Compact in 1620 in Provincetown Harbor as, in a sense, planting the seeds of revolution. Here's a group of people that are not where they expected to be, and they had to establish some sort of self-government, and they signed an agreement that said that they were going to act as a unit. And so some historians point to that as, well, that perhaps is really the beginning, although they didn't realize at the time, those people, what was going to happen, of course.
So the seed was planted with regard to self-governance back then.
Exactly.
The Mayflower Compact.
Yes. And then, of course, there were a series of other things that occurred between there and 1761. In 1732, we have the Molasses Act, which, of course, was an act of Parliament that began taxation. And that was before Parliament needed any source of real revenue to make up the debt from the war, because the war hadn't occurred yet. That is the French and Indian War. So you can
So
trace
these really weren't direct taxes, these were more like tariffs, right? Because they were put on the product.
Yes.
And then shipped to the colonies.
Yes.
And the colonies obviously had to pick up the cost of that.
Had to pay, yes, exactly. And
there were a number of acts that came up that made a continuous burden on the colonists.
That's exactly right. And some people say, you know, the revolution perhaps didn't really need to happen if Parliament had played things differently. That perhaps today, what we call the United States might have become sort of like Canada, a part of a larger government. Of course, that's only speculation. But the fact of the matter is that there was a series of acts from 1761 right up to 1775, one after another, that produced great taxes on the colonies, and then in some cases were repealed and followed by even more stringent taxes, up to what was then, of course, the breaking point.
I was curious as to what was the representation that the colonists did have afforded to themselves in relationship to Great Britain. Were they given any means of, appealing to the crown?
There was some opportunity for colonial self-government, which unfortunately then got removed by Parliament during the period that was through the 1770s in effect. I'll give you an example. Up until the mid-1770s, the colonists were able to appoint their own governors. But then there was an act passed in 1774.
Is that the Coercive Act?
The Coercive Acts, which, by the way, the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. It's interesting about the terminology. And that was an act that said several things. First of all, Britain appoints the governors now. You don't do that anymore as a colony.
Now, did that happen in all the colonies, or did that start in Massachusetts?
Well, it was Massachusetts was the target, but it did spread, and that happened, of course, more than once. that act also said, and you all in the colonies are required to quarter British troops when they need to be quartered. And just put yourself in the shoes of being a colonist and being told, now, in your small house, you have to put up 2 or 3 members of the British troops who are occupying your city. And that, of course, that truly rankled people.
Did they get paid for that?
No.
Oh, yes, I think that would rankle people.
That was expected. So those were some of the final acts.
So there was a really antagonism between the British government at that point and the colonies.
Yes.
But now, these having people forced to live in your house, did that happen on Cape Cod?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I can't tell you the documentation of that, but it was particularly in Boston. And because, of course, Boston was a hub, and there were British troops that were stationed there. But I don't have any documentation about the degree to which Cape Codders had to do that.
Okay. Talk to us a little bit about the Townsend Act. I know that came up as something that had an impact on Cape Cod.
Yes, the Townsend Act was an act that was passed by a member of Parliament. It was proposed by a member of Parliament that put a tax on a number of things, China, lead, and so on, and it included tea, but it was not the only thing. It was also one that was affected a lot of people in a lot of different ways because there were so many products that were going to be taxed. That was ultimately repealed, except the one on tea, and that, of course, stayed. And of course, became a rallying point, as we all know.
And it seemed like the underlying theme there was that the British government wanted to bail out the East India Company.
Yes.
Which was having financial problems. So they did that on the backs of the colonists.
That's exactly right, yes.
It seemed like the focus of that activity was in Boston, but it sounds like it spread.
It definitely spread. And that is something that happened repeatedly during that revolutionary period. Of course, and with Cape Cod and the islands being so close to Boston, we were very much affected and very aware of what was going on. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what happened with the ship, the William?
Yes, that's a kind of an interesting and very much Cape Cod-centered story. There were 4 tea ships that originally started out from England in that period in the mid-1770s, and 3 of them made it, but the 4th one didn't. That was the ship William, and that foundered on what we would say would be our friends, the shoals off of Truro. And I say our friends because there were other shipwrecks there of British ships, which then resulted in some advantages for the Patriots. But the foundering of the William presented an interesting dilemma for the people of Truro. Here's this British ship that is actually lost. It's just being washed away by the waves, and all of this tea in floating bales is falling into the water. So you have several choices. You could drink it, you could sell it, or you could perhaps try to return it, or none of the above. And actually what really happened was all of the above. But it presented an interesting problem for the Truro people to decide. So 3 ships made it to Boston, which then resulted in the so-called Tea Party, but the William foundered off of Cape Cod.
So in essence, we had our own little tea party down here on the Cape.
You could say that, yes.
And from what I understand, you can still periodically see the remains of the ship?
No, the remains of the ship that you can still see is the Somerset.
Ah, the battleship.
The big battleship that foundered in 1778 in the same place, roughly.
Right. And that was actually a business down here, right? Getting things that came off of ships that floundered off the coast.
Absolutely. The fact of the matter is that one particular resource from the Somerset is something that really helped the Cape. There could also say that there were human resources. Particularly, the Patriots captured more than 400 men off of that ship. A few drowned, but most of them were captured, and they were marched all the way from Truro to Boston by a relatively small group of Patriots. Now, not all of them made it. Some drifted off, some passed away, but a body of well over 300 prisoners made it to Boston and were later used in prisoner exchanges during the latter part of the war. That was in '78. But the material resource that turned out to be effective was the fact that the bilge pump of this huge man of war was something that the Cape Codders then began to use to pump seawater into the areas that were cleared for it, so it could actually evaporate and produce salt, because the British had destroyed the salt industry on Cape Cod. So in an interesting way, that was something that was provided.
They destroyed it, and then they helped us restart it.
You could say it that way, yes indeed. Yeah. And of course, salt being very important for food preservation.
Of course. One episode that I think is really interesting is the closure of the Barnstable Courthouse. Could you talk to us a little bit about what happened then?
Yes, it goes back to the Otis family that I referred to before. And there are three figures in the Otis family of Barnstable Village. And Colonel James Otis Sr. was the judge of the Court of Common Pleas, which is, if you look at the Barnstable Village today, you'll see a white building that is the home of the Tales of Cape Cod. Well, that's the place where the Court of Common Pleas took place. He had two children, James Otis Jr., who made the fiery speech in 1761, and his daughter, Mercy, who married Dr. Warren, was a very well-educated woman who wrote pieces that were published about the Revolution. Well, in any case, what happened was that the Judge Otis Sr. had been appointed by the Crown to be the judge. And one day, a group of protesters approached him. They were very polite to him because they had great respect for him. And they said, "We are going to close the court, and that you have done your duty, sir, because you were appointed by the Crown, and now we're going to do our duty." And they closed the court, and he actually allowed them to do it. Of course, he was put in a tough position because he represented the Crown, but he also was became very much in favor of the revolutionary movement himself. So that's the story of the closing of the courthouse.
And a large crowd showed up for that.
Absolutely.
I think I read in your book that it was 10% of the population showed up for that closure.
Oh, yes.
That's quite
yes.
significant.
It's significant, yes, indeed. Yeah.
So while all of this is going on, we're starting to see activity. We're seeing things happening in Concord and Lexington.
Yes.
I know things happen closer to home. I know you're going to maybe share a little bit of that with us. But I think what really amazed me as I was getting to understand some of this history was the role of the Wampanoags in really an instrumental part of the Revolutionary War with regard to our area.
Yes. When it came time for the establishment of what we call the militia, the town of Mashpee and all of the other towns, of course, stepped up, and men volunteered to join the militia. Mashpee had the highest percentage of people who stepped up, not the highest number, but the highest percentage. And the question comes up immediately, why would that be? Why wouldn't it be Barnstable, which is a larger population center? And of course, when you think about it, it makes great sense that there would be a higher percentage in Mashpee, because the native peoples saw the revolution as a possible avenue toward being able to recoup some of the many things that they had lost. Unfortunately for the Wampanoag, it didn't really work out that way, but that is something that is just statistically shown. So that's the story on that. Yeah.
And I know they were involved in, apparently we sent troops to Marshfield. The militia was sent to Marshfield, and the Wampanoags were very involved in that.
They were part of the group. Here's what happened, and we could say that this is an indirect connection between Cape Cod and Lexington and Concord. In Marshfield, there was a British garrison, and there was a group of militia who were keeping an eye on the British. In April of 1775, the word came down that the militia, that is the Patriot militia, was going to be drawn toward Lexington because something was brewing. And immediately the word came down to Cape Cod that we need to replace these people because we got to keep a continuing eye on the British garrison. And so a group of militia from Sandwich and Falmouth, et cetera, got together and they began to move toward Marshfield. They didn't really get off Cape because then word came down that, well, the British have left their garrison. And so there was no longer any need to replace the militia that had then gone to Concord or Lexington. And so, in effect, both sides went to Lexington.
Would that have been the first time, though, that an entire group came together from Cape Cod to go off Cape to defend the position of the Patriots?
I'd have to check on that to be sure whether it was the first time. But the fact of the matter is that I think we may need to make a distinction between three things: the militia, the Minutemen, and the Continental Army. The Continental Army, of course, was a force that was headed by George Washington, and it was across all of the colonies. Of course, it had members from Massachusetts and Cape Cod in particular. But they were moving back and forth among other places and well-known battles, participating in those. The Minutemen were a subset of the militia that were quite well trained, but the militia itself were a group of local people who were maintaining their regular lives, but then they had to sometimes respond to what was called an alarm. A British garrison or a British troop or a British regiment was approaching, and so all of a sudden the local militia in that town or the two towns nearby would have to drop their tools and their farming equipment or their fishing nets and join up and go and meet the enemy that were threatening. And when that was done, then they would go back to work again.
Now, were they paid for by the town?
Yeah, they were actually paid for by the colonial government. Yeah.
The colonial,
Yeah.
so it wasn't town specific.
No, but I should say that the payment was often either done by land or in terms of land being awarded to them, or the actual pension was not enacted by Congress until well after the war, and then many of them did get some pension in recognition for their service, separate from the Continental Army.
And I suspect that was the hope of the Wampanoags, that they would benefit from participation in both the militia and I believe there were some in the Continental Army as well, correct?
Yes, there were. But I think the benefit for them would have been in regaining of land, of course, as you could expect, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so now we have the Patriots, beating their drums and being very much activists here on the Cape. But there had to be a group of people that were not really keen about what was happening. What happened to those folks?
Well, lots of examples can be given about how people were really torn between the two points of view. There were loyalists who were, in many ways, doing just fine, thank you very much. In particular, tradesmen who were making trade back and forth between England and the colonies, and who saw no real advantage economically to joining a protest because things were going well. That was particularly true in Barnstable, and it was absolutely true in Nantucket. And Nantucket was actually a divided island. We had on Nantucket Quaker merchants who were dealing whaling oil with England and getting good flour in return for cooking food. Also being Quaker, they were anti-war, and so a very important force on the island that then resulted in a split. As far as the question about what happened to them, well, some Loyalists joined the cause, but some did not. And after the war, a number of them emigrated to Canada. Some stayed, and of course, things were patched up.
From reading your book, it sounds like some went back to Britain.
Yes.
But we're not really embraced there.
That is absolutely right, and that's another place where they immigrated to, or back to. So there's several answers to the question.
That shows you the outcome, but while in the midst of all of this, while all of this is going on, how are the relations between we'll call them the Patriots and the Loyalists? That must have caused quite a bit of friction, even locally.
Yes, it did. And we have, for example, something that is, you could say, shameful. In Barnstable Village itself, a group of patriots captured a Loyalist woman, Abby Freeman, and tarred and feathered her and paraded her on a rail through the village. Now, if you think about having hot pine tar poured on your body and then, of course, the feathers added to it, and the public shaming that would take place, it's something that is really nothing we would not say is admirable behavior. And so there were things that were not considered examples of good behavior on both sides. They did split families as well.
Did the committees of correspondence do anything to kind of bring people together in the conversation with Britain?
The committees of correspondence, which actually began in Boston and spread to the other colonies, were basically committees that said, here's a list of our grievances, and we've got to consider them and take action. And so I would say that probably the Committee of Correspondence would have been the action of people who are very ardent patriots. I wouldn't say that there's any evidence that some Loyalists joined the cause. I'm sure some could have, but my knowledge base is a little bit shallow on that. And I think what we have to do is think about a divided situation. Our country right now is going through a serious division. We've only had perhaps 2 or 3 other examples of this that have been so severe. One of them is the Revolutionary period.
Yeah.
Another, of course, is the Civil War, and one more is the Vietnam War, where people are at loggerheads, and there seems to be no changing of sides. So that would be characteristic of the Revolutionary period.
Of what was going on at that time.
Yes.
But the bottom line is, we came out, and we came out of that as a united country.
We did, and with a great deal of growing pains, which ultimately led to of course, the Constitution.
I have to say, we've just really touched what's been in this wonderful book that you folks have put together. And here I thought I lived on sleepy little Cape Cod where nothing ever happens except during the summer months when the tourists come down. And we played a significant role on a variety of levels. I mean, the activities of the militias in the area, the involvement of liberty poles where people came together to talk about freedoms, the fighting back of tariffs that were really holding the people back.
Yes.
Taking advantage of opportunities with tea and so forth.
That's right.
So the history of Cape Cod really comes to life in this book. And I want to thank you and the committed group. I know it wasn't just you, Dr. Martin. It was a committed group of historians. Worked on this for a long time?
Yes. About 3 years ago, a group of us, I would have to say amateur historians, at least that's true of me, were conversing and said, you know, in 3 years, there's going to be a 250th anniversary of independence, and let's take a look. There had been some 19th century writings about the revolution on the Cape and Islands, and sometimes earlier as well. But there seemed to be a need to update it and to add new material and to draw it all together under a single volume. And so that's the task that we set for ourselves to do. And we have something like 27 different contributors to the book.
Well, it flows beautifully, and I would recommend this to anyone who cares about Cape Cod and its history. Where can people get this book, Dr. Martin?
The easiest way is to go to there are 3 different bookstores that are carrying it at the moment. Titcomb's in Sandwich, then the Brewster Bookstore in Brewster, and then the Falmouth Historical Society also has an inventory. There are some others that are available. People are also welcome to send an email to me, and I can arrange to get a book. And my email is davidmartindr, like doctor, at AOL.com. And so if you send me an email, if none of those other options work, we'll work it out.
That's great. Again, I can't recommend this enough. The book is wonderful. The illustrations in it are great, and you really should get it. Dr. Martin, thank you so much for joining us on Government Unlocked.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.